For 40 years, I've walked the line between worlds and am well versed in death. But I want to have faith in humans. Give me something to believe in. Earth below me, sky above me, fire within me. Brought to you by UPRN Network. I'm Trish Mo, and this is The Missing Piece. Welcome, everyone. Did it again. I knew it. Anyways, I am your host, Trish. This is The Missing Piece. It is Tuesday, I almost said June 27th. And we're broadcasting live on 105.3 FM New Orleans, as well as United Public Radio Network. And we are also, you can find us in archives on all your favorite podcast stations, as well as Roku now. So we've been on that for quite a few months now. Thank you to Carnation for sponsoring my show, as well as the network. And tonight I am welcoming back a good friend and a very knowledgeable man in the ghost hunting community, my friend Tanner Rutledge. So welcome, Tanner. For those of you who have not, I think you've been on my show twice before.
So
And for those of you that haven't watched those, go back. We talked about some crazy things in those as well. But just a little background on Tanner, and then I will let him tell you the rest. He's actually pretty renowned. He has over 20 years experience investigating hauntings and paranormal activity. He's also a private investigator. My cat, I don't know if you can hear that. And a host of Ghost Hunter Advice podcast. He's also hosts Writing Fright Podcast. Is that correct? Correct. And where he interviews best-selling authors in the horror, mystery, and thriller genres. And he has a debut mystery novel coming out, Fools and Corpses, that is set to be released this winter. You can find him at writingfight.com and on Facebook, Ghost Hunter Advice, or Tanner Rutledge author. Sorry. So welcome, Tanner, again. I apologize for all
no,
our
you're good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I think the last time you were on, it was kind of it wasn't planned, actually, which probably worked out better, because then I don't have all this. I don't cause all of my electronics to zap out, But or maybe it's the ghosts that do. I don't know. They're like, oh, Tanner's coming back on,
Let's mess with that guy.
So what have you been up to lately? I know that's exciting about your new projects.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that intro. A lot. So I stepped out of ghost hunting for a while and concentrated primarily on my writing. So I was a private investigator for 15 years. I'm still licensed. I still am an investigator, but I'm not active in the courts in legal setting doing PI work. I always said when I was going to finish that, I would move into writing and taking my writing more seriously. So in 2020, I started taking more classes, getting to know other writers and other authors to see if that was a career path, and it is. So debut novel is coming out this winter. Can't really say when. It's either going to be like December or February, but it is coming out, and I'm super excited about that. I brought Ghost Hunter Advice back. So if there's anybody here that listened to the show, the old feed went down, and when I switched providers, it's a new feed. So it is back up, it's back out, and I'm getting the old episodes out as I recover them and as I remaster them, because I do have a bit more experience in the studio now than I did those few years ago when I started the podcast Ghost Hunter Advice. But yeah. So 20 years investigating hauntings, investigating supernatural activity, documenting those. So one thing that I try to do is always look for the narrative, look for the story there. It's part of, kind of all. I've always been a writer, so that story element has been important. And traditionally, hauntings and supernatural activity have been passed down generation to generation as stories more so than evidence. So yeah, that's what I've been up to.
Now, you've been a ghostwriter as well, correct?
I haven't done well, yeah. So I've done a little bit of ghostwriting for some blogs. I've written primarily for trade publications. I used to have a column in PI magazine. I did the PI 101 where I taught new investigators kind of the basics of private investigation. I've written for some fitness magazines, and yeah, nothing in the paranormal field as far as magazines or anything like that, other than my podcast and a couple of guest spots.
That's really interesting to me, since those are two of your main, very big passions in your life. So it's interesting to me that you've, um, I mean, I get it, that um, it's a lot to write a novel,
Mhm,
but it's interesting to me that you even on like blogs and stuff, you've never done anything like that before in the paranormal field.
mhm,
Um, Now, I know that's one thing I was thinking about, that last time we talked, actually, well, this was probably back in the fall. We were talking about the importance of taking a break from the paranormal field. Um, when you're a person that's very kind of deeply embedded in multiple um, probably locations at once, and different, helping different people and things like that. I know a lot of amateur ghost hunters and researchers that it might be something that they do once a month, once every few months, what have you. But I know for people like you and I, like, we become very involved in the research aspect and things like that, and it does take a toll.
mhm.
um, so do you think that, I mean, it sounds like the way you're doing it now and bringing ghost hunter advice back, which I think is excellent, because you were one of the first that I ever ran into, um, that also backed things up scientifically,
Mhm.
you know, um, and have had that experience for a long time. So do you think, now that the paranormal field, blew up over the last few years, do you think it's kind of balancing out as far as um, people being able to discern the frauds and things like that? Because I know that's a lot of your work as well.
Um, yeah, so, like, with the frauds, what I've come to in the field is, like, when we're trying to get people to believe things, or when I started out, I think there's a way that we evolve as we walk into any profession, any hobby. We start off with this base understanding and going out with an idea or a goal, and over decades of doing it, that goal changes. You start out wanting to experience something, then it turns into wanting to prove it and wanting to show it to other people. That's
Right.
where all these teams come from that have these television shows, or not really television shows, that are showing their evidence, posting it online, looking for feedback. They're looking to get more people to believe what's happening, and after a while of doing that, you realize that it's not going to happen, because you can fake anything, especially with
Right.
AI and the technology we have now. Every single piece of dramatic evidence, from EVPs to videos to photographs, can be faked. Investigators can lie, people can lie, and quite frankly, nobody believes anyone anymore. People
Right.
barely believe what they experience. So it's, I'm in
You're
the
right. I think in the beginning, we transitioned from people believing absolutely everything.
mhm.
Well, I mean, for a while there, before that, it was absolutely nothing. Nobody believed anything. And then we believed everything. And then we're back to nobody trusts anyone and doesn't believe anything anymore.
But I do think people are more willing now to go out and experience it for themselves. So that's what I've run into. When people want to, they start asking me questions. They're like, "Well, I don't believe it." I'm like, "Okay." I'm going to be running this experiment next weekend. Why don't you come out with me and you can see some stuff and we'll see what you believe. Now, there's two different things. There's believing that it's happening and seeing that it's happening, and then there's believing it's
Mhm.
a ghost or believing that it's something else. Another thing that
Right.
changes as you get into this field is you realize it's not black and white. It's not, oh, ghost or the spirits of the dead. It's not ghost are demons. It's not any one thing. And
No.
you start seeing the world through a new lens where there's all of these different possibilities. So do the dead come back and talk? I don't know. If you would have asked me in my first 5 years of ghost hunting, I would have said yes, absolutely, 100%. We are talking to the dead with EVPs. Today, there's a possibility that we affect the world around us. There's a possibility that we are imprinting on environments and actually causing the stuff themselves. There's a
Yeah.
possibility, yeah, it's ghosts. But right now, I think the biggest shift for me and the biggest shift with talking to people is saying, I don't know what's going on. I just know that something's going on. And with individuals, I think when it comes to showing like seeing who is a fraud, it's the people that like have the answer and it's this or it's nothing at all and they're selling you a t-shirt for it.
Right. Um, I've thought about this a lot in my lifetime as well as far, because my opinion, I for one, I have realized that I don't know anything actually. Just like every time I think I come to a conclusion about, just as you said, about what something of my own opinion of what something is or isn't, the universe shows me, oh, wait a minute, it might not be, or maybe there's other ways. So then I was like, what if it's all of them? What if we've done so much, just in the last few years, research and advancement on the theory of, um, multiverse, and different dimensions and things like that. That what if we're all right? What if, but it's based, we just all happen to live in this same big multiverse. So you might be talking to a person who can only see things in 2D or 3D, whereas the next person might be in the fifth dimension, or so what if all of these people who are have it's kind of like the flat earth theory, maybe they do see it that way. And then maybe that's because they that's their dimension. That's how they can only travel in a linear fashion, forward and back, or whatever. So I was like, maybe, what if we're all right?
Mhm.
Based on where we're at. And I know, so I try to keep that in mind when I'm telling people things, but I've come to
There's
the
a
conclusion. Sorry, go ahead.
oh no, yeah, you go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I No, I was going to say, even with I was going to ask you this because I read something recently. There was a lady that, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to look up her name. I had seen, she was talking about her she was kidnapped by a serial killer, and um it was when she was a teenager, so she was 14, 15 years old when she initially, um you know notified law enforcement and things like that when she freed herself. But at the time, she said, in that mindset, they didn't believe her. But then when she got older, she joined law enforcement, and she realized that, looking back, um, it wasn't that they didn't believe her. They absolutely believed everything she was saying, because she could prove it. She could prove, locations and um, just different things she had visualized, and she could name off, license plate and the description of all these different things, and in very great detail. And she said it wasn't that they didn't believe her, it was that this story was so shocking they couldn't wrap their minds around it. And I think we
Yep.
do that to ourselves as well,
Well,
you
as
know.
investigators, as a private investigator, there were several situations that I went into where family members had heard something, but they just could not believe it because it was
Hmm.
so off the wall. We had domestic cases where people were leading double lives, and people think that they know their spouses.
Yeah.
your husband or your wife or whoever has a second family, and by the way, they're transgender and living as a, you know,
Yeah.
opposite of whatever sex they were at the time. Those cases were insane. It took actually physically going there and showing them what was happening to get them to believe it
Yeah.
and to open up. And when they did, they cracked them. And that's a danger that I talk about with people, and I have for years when they do want to come out in the field with me. It's like, listen, you have this set idea of what your reality is, and you might see something tonight that challenges that. And for someone
Hmm.
who is set, stone cracks. If your ideas are set in stone and you're not open to maybe I'm wrong, there could there are psychological damages or psychological dangers to going on to going into, excuse me, these situations and seeing things that you don't believe in, and having that something that is so foundational to your view of yourself and your identity, to have that
Hmm.
shaken, it really affects people. So I try to make sure that
Yes.
people are ready for that, and some people aren't. Um, we had a kid, not a kid, he was in his 20s. He came with us, and he was a jerk, but he saw a hand come out of a wall, and he cracked. I mean, he
Oh yeah.
was screaming and just he went from being this he was a baseball player, super cocky baseball player, to basically being a toddler and screaming in the corner of the room. It was just a hand, but it cracked him.
There's, as you know, knowing me, you know a lot about, my experiences and stuff. And I think anyone who does know me, in this field, or even anyone who has ever spent maybe a day with me would agree that, um, it's very hard for people to live in the world that I do, because their minds are blown all the time, and just because that's the way the universe and entities and things interact with me. So if they're around me, they experience that as well, including my family, and they can't deal with it for very long either. That same thing, and half of it, they still, even if they see things with their own eyes, they still don't believe it. Which is fine. Which is fine. That's human nature. It's the way we've been, I guess. It's the way society is. But when people see movies, are a good example, where they're like, just in the last, I would say, 5 to 10. Well, I mean, it's always been there. We just didn't pay attention. 5 to 10 years, though, there you have all of these Stranger Things. Um, Gosh, there's so many paper. What is it? Paper Girls. Have you
Mhm.
seen that one? Um, Wednesday. Yeah, all of these movies coming out and shows and series, and people are like, wow, science fiction has become amazing. And I watch these things, I'm like, oh wow, that's like my everyday life. All right. And but for people who don't live that way, they're like, oh, no way, no way, that would never happen, that would never happen. It's just a coincidence, it's a coincidence. um so going back, I listened to you released, I guess you said you have brought back a lot of the first episodes of your podcast, and I listened to um, some of those, including I think it was your very first one.
Oh god,
Um,
that was horrible.
I look back, I'm like, yeah, same thing. But so I don't know if you've ever told that on my show, though, how you got into um the paranormal field 20 years ago, how that first case, and like how you started helping other people with it,
Trying to remember that first case 20 years ago. Um,
or even in your own life, I
let's
guess, your
see.
own
So, like, a
experiences.
lot of it, like, getting me into it, my grandmother was really into it. And I grew up watching Outer Limits and Unsolved Mysteries, and just listening to her stories about hauntings, and then experiencing the stuff that was in my house. One of the earliest, I don't remember if it was my first, but one of my earliest was at a middle school, and I don't think this was a haunting. I think this was more of a time slip. But Sean and I had gone in, and we were teenagers at the time. I think I started driving the next year. We went in and we were walking around. It was close to dark, but it was day or no, it was getting dark. And we get back to the back of the school and we get to the blacktop. And suddenly we didn't close our eyes. We didn't blink or anything, and it was just daylight. And there were people walking around, and there was it looked like construction going on in the blacktop. Was Sean had gone over into a building, and I was there for a minute, and like this guy just walks right past me, and he goes out, and the blacktop was cleared and it was clean, where it was a bit more cluttered when I was in school there, and when we were there that day. And then suddenly, again, I didn't blink or anything. It just snapped, and we were back, and it was nighttime. Sean comes running out the building, and he goes, "Did you see that? Did you see that?" And I was like, I don't know what just happened. He goes, "Yeah, this woman just walked into the building, and the whole place, it smelled like perfume, and there was light coming through the windows." So I had a little cell phone. This was back in the days, like the cell phones just came out. They were analog. The little green screen lit up, and I flipped it open, and mom was coming to pick us up because, again, I didn't drive. So we get out there, and she's like, "Why are you running from me?" Or actually, I don't remember if she called her. She ran up, but she goes, "Why are you guys running from me?" We're like, we're not running. We've been here this whole time, we think, and I think we've only been here for a few minutes. But she goes, "No, I showed up to pick you guys up, and you were standing there, and then you just took off across the field, and you ran behind those piles of mulch." And we're like, "That wasn't us." She's like, "It was you. You were wearing the same clothes and everything." And so we decided not to stick around and find out what that was, and we left. And that was way back. I was about 16, and that was one of my very first.
Wow.
Um,
Now that's a whole different
mhm,
story. And I've never heard that one from you, but now that makes me that has other that sparked other questions. So, knowing what you know now,
mhm.
on things like that, do you consider when you see when people claim to see basically other versions of you
Mhm.
or clones or what have you, what do you think it is? Do you think it's clones? Do you think it's you, like the time slip thing, like you in a different time or dimension? Do you think it's part of your consciousness being projected? What's your opinion on that?
So that particular instance, I didn't know at the time. I just thought it was weird. I was a kid, and it
Right.
wasn't until, I don't know, maybe close to 10 years later, that I ran upon another time slip, and I was with an investigator who actually knew what that was. Um, and I was able to look back and say, "Oh, that was most likely a time slip." I think what we were seeing there was us running from something, possibly in the future or later on that night. Time slips have this weird thing where there's multiple points. They think this is all theory, where there's multiple points on the timeline that touch. You have past, you have present, you have future of what happened on that property, all happening simultaneously. And being the big thing here is being experienced simultaneously by different individuals or by a single individual. With this one, like looking back on it, I am curious, like if we would have stayed there, would something have been chasing us across that field? Would we have run? Because it's kind of circular. So we look back in the past, to where some work was being done in the school. I think mom looked into the future of us running away from something. Now there are other like doppelganger type things that we've heard about, or we've had clients that experience. If there is an entity with intelligence, um, The way parapsychologists believe that we see or interact with ghosts is that they're not physically there, they're overlaid over our perception. So, like, our
Right.
eyes and our brains are, um, decoding the environment around us, and we're seeing what we need to see, but those things are interfering with that and kind of transposing or transplanting themselves over it. And then we're able
Yeah.
to see them. They're not actually there. We're just seeing them, however they want to be seen. So they could be anybody they want. It's
Right.
one of the rationalizations as to like why ghosts have clothes, 'cause clothes can't die. That's how they present to us. Um,
Hmm.
and then, I mean, there's people that believe that there's demons and these elemental spirits that could really just be whatever they want, whenever they want.
Right. And then there's extraterrestrials who have now with more people coming forward in studies, they have kind of the ability to project images and things. Even, they consider them also like the walk-ins, and different types of shapeshifters, things like that. But also the living, I've found since I had been used and experimented with. I didn't experiment with it, but other people experimented using me with remote viewing and things. Um, in that manner, and I think a lot of people actually do that without even being conscious of doing it, without consciously doing it, which is also a danger,
Mhm.
you know. Um, and then of course all the courses and stuff nowadays that teach people how to do things like that and astral project and
Yep.
and remote view and stuff. But there's a very for those of us who didn't learn for those of us that learned the real hard way by you know by default of it just happening in our lives. um that's a dangerous line, of where you're kind of teetering on the line of well, aside from privacy issues, but free will and things like that, and so which it's like I said, those of us that are in the field know that there's universal laws on these things, like psychics know. We
Mhm.
can't just use our gifts to go, um, you know, take money from people and things like that, because there would be there's consequences to things like that, or even for witches. You can't just go around cursing people. There's a price for that. There's price. Everything has a balance, and so I think it's dangerous that. Um, and maybe that's why they did away with all the Ouija boards and things like that back in the probably during your grandmother's time, actually. Back in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. That's when it there was an influx of people, um of interest in the paranormal, and that's when they came out with all of those things and selling them to kids and everything. And then they didn't realize the danger of such things. um now
Just
when we talk.
curious.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry,
sorry.
go ahead.
The case you were asking about, was that the one where the guy's head fell off, or is it the one, um, what was it, the park? The one that you
The
were talking about from the podcast?
Oh, the one that I of yours that I listened to?
Mhm.
It was you went to you were telling about discerning between fraudulent cases and those that weren't. And in this specific case, I think it had to do with a lady's family was actually
Oh, yeah.
behind
So that
making
one
her
wasn't
think
my
she was
first case.
crazy.
That one was actually just it was probably somewhere between 2012 and 2015. So I had 3 cases back to back with that one. So we went in. I was actually hired as a private investigator for that one. I did it as a debugging. We went into their house. She said, "I don't know if my house is haunted. I don't know what's going on, but I need somebody to check it out." And I said, "Okay, I'll come out and look at it." and I might charge you for a debugging, which is where we go through a house, we make sure there's no listening devices, any electronics is not supposed to be there, or anything that would be causing an issue for the client. So that was she had gotten in touch with me through a family member who knew me, and I went to her house. Beautiful house. It's one of those, like, when you walk in, it's like a Scooby Doo house. And when I walked in, I started looking around, and I found speakers in the walls. I
Wow.
found different things that to just they were just weird. So outside of the house, there were footprints leading around a window and like through the yard, and I could tell where somebody had been ducked down, listening or doing something. It turned out like the family was her adult children. She was very, very wealthy. Her adult children were trying
Makes sense.
to fake a haunting to get her to publicly talk about it so that they could have her declared basically incompetent to handle the funds, and they could take control of all of the assets. They were
Wow.
written out of the will.
Good for her.
So, yeah, that
Oh
crappy
my
case. That
gosh.
one wasn't a first case. That one, that was my first. I call it a Scooby Doo case, but and then I had like 3 or 4 other cases that were very similar to that followed.
That's interesting. And I assume that nowadays it would be so much easier to do that with I don't personally use, and I hate it. I don't use it. Like Alexa. No offense
Mhm,
to Google or Apple or any of those. Siri, I don't like. I just don't like it because I don't like Bluetooth. I don't like. I remember watching all the ways that people can hack into like baby monitors and things like that, even before things like Alexa came out and Siri and all of that. um, it's just you're giving people more access to your life, and especially I would assume if someone with money, someone with um, any type of it's just like anything political now, or certain, I don't know, celebrities and things like that. Um, and it goes back to no one trusting anyone,
mhm,
but it's the same. My daughter, I was we came to a house today and she was going to ring the doorbell, and I'm like, no, 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 people hate doorbells, don't do that, because then people's dogs start barking, or you might wake someone up or whatever. And she's like, well, then why do you have them? I was like, well, it's really older houses, actually, before people had phones to call and tell somebody that they're going to stop by, or which it was, if you think about it, we didn't that was the alert that people would have back in the day. Technically now you have instant messaging abilities. We don't have
mhm,
Pony Express, so it allows easier access into our lives, but it's scary because it is hard to differentiate. I would assume, if you're not used to it, what might be in fact a haunting, or what might be something messing with you,
mhm.
or someone, I
Well,
guess.
with that one, like, they went through a lot of trouble, so they hid the Bluetooth speakers so that they could just make random noises and talk or do whatever when they wanted to. But then they also, like, left windows open, and they came into the house and walked around and stomped around, would move things. So this was, like, gaslighting times 1,000. They
Wow.
would go in and, like, move her keys. They would go in and, like, move cups around, move her food, and just make her think that she was losing her mind or the house was haunted. They even walked around in costumes, just in case. Yeah, that
Wow.
is I'm not kidding when I say Scooby Doo case.
That's that's crazy. And now it makes you wonder how many of these cases, there's so many. I've been studying a lot of, because Kansas is like the it it was notorious for mental institutions and asylums back in the day. And I've been looking into a lot of the records of patients at these places. And it makes you wonder now, knowing these things happen, how many of those cases were that same, were actually the family or somebody else doing. And then
Oh,
on the
yeah.
opposite side too, it makes you wonder now that we know what we know and we accept what these things, a lot of those people were committed for no reason, because maybe they were, psychic or mediums or whatever.
Well, not
On the
just that, I
opposite.
mean, people were committed for no reason, like, if,
Oh yeah.
especially women, if the
Yeah, if
husband
they
got
didn't
tired of
clean
the wife,
house. Yeah.
"You nuts. You can't lock her
Mm.
up, put her in a straitjacket. Let's do some electric shock therapy. I don't like the way that kitchen door was cleaned." Um, it it was nuts back then, the crap that they got away with in, like, sanitariums and
Mm.
asylums and
That's probably why, was it the first Queen Elizabeth never got married, she
mhm.
she didn't wanna be beheaded or
Yeah.
committed or something.
No,
Very
it,
sad.
it was dark. So, like, I write, in the fiction world, I write thrillers, mysteries, and horror, and a lot of times when I'm looking for stuff, I just look back a few decades, and I'm
Yeah.
like, "Okay, that's pretty bad."
I I've written, aside from poetry, I don't have any and blogs and such, I don't have any of my stories published that I've written as far as fiction. Um, but I've thought about it a lot. I'm like I was saying with my life, most people don't believe it or believe things that have happened unless you know me personally and you're like, "Oh yeah, that's Trisha's everyday weirdness." But um and I've considered that. I'm like, with I could make short stories about every monster I've encountered, every strange event stuff, but I would have to make it fiction basically. I would have to
Mhm.
change the names and stuff. So because then that's the only way people would get to experience the story because then their mind would allow them to read that and process it. Whereas if I made it a nonfiction story, they'd be like, "Pfft, okay, that didn't actually happen."
Well, I mean, like, even when you do nonfiction, you have to change the name, you have to change the place.
Right.
I'll even change the states sometimes, to
Oh
make sure
yeah.
that those people can't get in, and it it does feed into fiction, like writing fiction, especially horror fiction. A lot of the monsters and something that I've been told about the haunting book that I'm or the haunted book that I'm working on right now. Um, the idea of the way that I'm doing the haunting is something that's not really done in fiction, and it comes from actually going out and investigating these things and just being like, you know what? What if this is happening? And instead of having to explain that in an investigation to a client, what if this is happening in your house? I could just write a completely fictional story talking about that and get that concept out in the world.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
I wonder, and can we just, start a Scooby Doo group and,
Yes.
like find a van? I was talking about, yeah, maybe I should just buy a van and like travel.
Yep. Get a Great Dane.
Paint it like the Mystery Machine.
Yep. There was, I was gonna say something and I lost it. Um, no, it's gone.
Now, I've thought about also, I've considered, we are both in or currently or have been in the fitness industry as well. So health and wellness is important to me, but I've also, I studied psychology for a long time and I minored in that. And I was thinking about with all these people coming forward nowadays, whether it be extraterrestrial, supernatural, what have you, there is not very many. I guess it would be like parapsychologists,
Mhm.
but there's not a lot in like. And I was thinking about that. I'm like, how can you can't really go to school. Uh, I mean, you can go to school for psychology, but in a lot of those situations, unless you've experienced it yourself, it's very hard to understand where a person's coming from and relate to them as far as their trauma for those things. There's not a school like you can't teach that. You
Mhm.
can't teach the shock and the your brain accepting things and um like you were talking about not how even the strongest people their mind can break um from such things, but there's not a lot of people that do that now. How I don't even know how they would regulate that.
So,
It's
like,
like
with stuff
healers,
like
but
that, with, if you're I'm just gonna take possession because that's what everybody's mind goes to when they start thinking about the paranormal and stuff,
mhm,
especially with all the demon TV shows. But say, like, somebody is going to get an exorcism is not like a one and done thing.
mhm,
You would go through you first you'd be evaluated, along with multiple times of meeting with the priest, going through the ritual and going through the actual exorcism. You're also going to have to see a counselor.
right.
I think the church has people that they work with for that talk to people, but a lot of times in these hauntings and getting away from the demonic, in hauntings, if people deal with their trauma, no, I'm not talking about like ghost related trauma. I'm talking about the actual trauma in their life. Because
Mhm,
generally, if someone's experiencing something, there's not just supernatural stress. There's a lot of stuff that's going on in their life. Most of the
right.
people that I've run into, they're not taking care of themselves physically. They're not doing any sort of self care, or they're not doing anything for their mental health. So one of the things that I always try to do is get them, if you're not talking to a therapist, then talk to a therapist and do that maintenance. Doesn't mean you're nuts. We've all got crap going on. I can tell there's a lot of tension in this room. Something's going on with you guys. Do couples counseling, do whatever you need to. If your job sucks, just take the steps you need to do there. Do you have financial stress? Well, let's talk about that. Get out and go for a walk every day, go to the gym, start doing things to put more positivity into your life. And those negative things that are happening in the haunting, I've noticed diminish, and a lot of times they'll stop. And along with doing exorcisms, doing rites, bringing in people who are religious leaders to do cleansings, if you do those two things together, it works a lot better than doing just an exorcism or something alone. I think um, that these entities are, if it is a consciousness, are attracted to the negative energy and feed off of it. So when you start
Oh, yeah.
bringing in more positivity and putting out more positivity, it starves them out and they leave. Or we affect the environment around us. Maybe there is something there, but like us, you are what you eat. If it's feeding on
Mhm.
a lot of negative BS, it becomes a lot of negative BS. And when it comes to the trauma there, like just dealing with stuff, a lot of times clears it.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that even not all of them, but most shadow people, and I learned this from parapsychologists actually, a lot of shadow figures in people's lives and that they witness and that affect them are projections from the living.
Mhm.
It's similar to poltergeist activity, but it actually all that negativity from a person or someone in the household, the property, whatever, manifests into the shadow figures that's literally like a negative entity affecting their lives. Um, and I didn't actually know that for a long time
Mhm.
until about a year or two ago. Um, but it's the same with health. It's the same with diseases and stuff, with cancers and even immune suppressant diseases. I know with myself, yes, I will have chronic long-term Lyme disease for the rest of my life. Does it always affect me? No, but it could based on my lifestyle. Yes, if I lower my vibration enough, I'll that's how people get anything, any colds or illnesses or anything, Um, and during those times, I look back in my life at the times I was possessed, and it was during times in my life that I was either working too much. One of the most, I guess, dangerous and probably most memorable times I was possessed. I was working during the day as an accountant for like 12 hours a day, stressful job, especially during tax season at an accounting firm. So I had corporate clients, about 30, over 30 corporate clients, and I hated it. So that's another negative, hated what I was doing. Um, Stayed in my little office all day, didn't talk to anyone except my secretary over the phone, maybe, just crunching numbers. Then I would get off from work from that job and go to another job at a jewelry store, which I also hated. Um, and I would close the books for them for the day. So I was working like, I don't know, 15 hours a day or something, maybe more.
Mhm.
And I was also going to school, stressful. And I was in my early 20s. I was drinking, I still went out with friends and things. So I was doing all these things that were really, really bad for me. And it affected my marriage at the time and everything else. So then I went home, would fight with my husband at the time, and we we had I attracted more. We had everything from infestations of like mice, and I mean it didn't matter what we did either. Like
Mhm.
we could have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on, exterminate, and they kept coming back. And I'm like, it was our lifestyle. I didn't know that at the time. But it was the way I was living,
Mhm.
obviously. And so when I was possessed, it actually got really bad. And there were even, different religions of people that tried to help me. Um, and I almost died actually that time. So um, I made it very drastic. I took a vacation, quit my jobs, made a very drastic change in my life. And because I was so afraid of ever letting that happen again, to where um, that time, I mean, it was like a horror movie, things
Mhm.
that um, like wanting to harm myself, or seeing water turn to blood. All kinds of things were happening in my life, and it was very dangerous. But I know now that that's lifestyle. You're absolutely right.
No, I'm glad you got past it, and it's law of attraction, and I'm not talking about, like, the '90s self-help, do cocaine and be positive and everything's great. I'm talking about, like, we know that like things are attracted to like things, so if you are putting out a certain type of energy, and that sounds so woo-woo, but if you are a certain type of person, you will attract other people that are like that. If you are a super negative person, you will attract negative people. If you are down on yourself, you will attract something or someone who wants
Hmm.
to take advantage of someone who's down on themselves. If you are exuding confidence, if you are upbeat, even if you're not in the best of situations, you will start attracting people that'll start giving you a leg up.
Yeah.
In writing, like it's freaking hard to get into fiction writing and to break into stuff. But getting out and putting if I put myself around other writers and I met
Hmm.
really good people with had a similar energy that wanted to pull me along with them, and it got my foot in the door and got me going. Same thing with private investigation. When I started my PI career, that's another hard one to break into. I was positive. I'm going to make this happen. It's going to happen. And I met people that were like, yeah, we're going to help you make it happen. Um, and it works that way in everything. Whatever you are doing and whoever you are, you will attract people and you will attract things that are like you, for better or for worse.
I was going to say, so how do you personally, um, with private investigation, or even paranormal research or things like that, I guess, well, teaching would still be in those areas would still be stressful and such. But how do you not fall into, I guess, taking all of that home?
Mhm.
What do you do personally, aside from like exercise and fitness and things like that? What do you do personally to stay grounded and not allow all of that to affect your personal life?
Before I didn't, and I got divorced. Um, I mean, we all go through it. Everybody gets hit and they get knocked down. But
Hmm.
after a while, doing PI work, that was one of those things where it was one negative thing right after the other, right after the other. Doing personal training and having something to balance that out, was how I pulled myself out of that. Exercising was a big part of it. Reading, making sure that I'm consuming content that's filling me up and filling me with positive ideas, mantras. I'm not talking about self help. I listen to a lot of finance podcasts about saving, getting out of debt, um, and moving forward. I listen to I read books like Atomic Habits, and I just put as much positive I feed on as much positive content as I can, and I try to stay away from negative stuff. Today, I curate my Facebook feed to make sure there's not a bunch of crap showing up for doom scrolling, and make sure there's not no political either side of the political stuff on there.
Yeah.
And I curate what I consume. Um, Also, I don't do PI work anymore. That was so bad, and I got to 15 years in it, and I hated it so much I walked away. I have my license just in case something happens to someone that I know, and I want to help them. So I have my license
Right.
still. Um, but I don't do it with paranormal investigations. I don't consider myself a paranormal investigator anymore. I'm more of a paranormal content creator. So I go out and I investigate, but I investigate to make content now. Um, and
I think
having that
that's
layer of
how I am
separation,
too.
yeah, and having that layer of separation helps because I'm not getting emotionally invested or charged in this. I'm looking for a good story.
I think one of the most beneficial things I did. It wasn't until my near death experience back in maybe 2018 that, I mean, it had happened all my life where spirits had tried to contact me and communicate with me about different situations and cold cases and missing persons cases and things like that. But it wasn't until that time that I was bombarded with it, with them. I became almost like a social worker for spirits, for the dead there for a while, is what I felt like. And those cases were consuming me, you know. Um, and so I think when I created boundaries with um, the dead, I guess, is when it helped me a lot, because otherwise it was, if you've ever seen that show Medium, with
Mhm.
Patricia Arquette, I've never actually watched the whole thing, but I did watch the first episode because my mom kept telling me, she's like, "You remind me exactly," she used to watch it all the
Oh my
time,
god, yeah, I used to watch that show. I loved that show.
where she goes to work for, I think she went to work for,
She was
as
a
an,
DA.
yeah,
Mhm,
yeah. Um, And so, and her name, was Patricia. Mine's Trisha, but
mhm.
the actress is Patricia. And I was like, that's interesting. But I said, yeah, that's exactly what was happening, especially when I was married, and that's why it affected. Um, Especially since I had not accepted those gifts back then either. So I was waking my husband up every night. I'm like, do you see all these people standing? How do you not see these people standing around the bed? Like, how do you, you know? And and just all the different cases I was trying to dive into for these spirits, and it was very overwhelming. And I definitely didn't know how to create boundaries or anything. It's just like, as a PI, you can't humanly possibly take on every single case that people ask you to do.
Well, as a
um,
PI, like, there's a hard stop there. They've gotta be able to afford me to do it.
right.
That's the
Yeah. And they can't just come stand by your bed in the middle of the night and
yeah. It's
say,
like you have to pay the retainer. It has to be a legal issue that I can help you with. Um, and those were the 2 big ones. Like, it had to be legal, it had to be, you had to be able to afford it, or it had to be super interesting enough for me to say, "Alright, I'll do it."
now, recently, see, I've been studying a lot of, which is interesting, that a lot of historical um, cases come across my radar recently. Maybe because I'm more knowledgeable, and maybe because that's what interests me. So I'm also reaching out in the ether to much older cases and like famous people and stuff. Like, I researched Jesse James a lot recently, especially since
Mhm.
that's a lot of the Kansas and Missouri area. But um, I think I was thinking about becoming a private investigator recently. But then I was like, man, I'm very empathic, and I can't. There's a lot of humans that absolutely disgust me in this world with the things that we're capable of, as far as I've always said that, like, humans are the biggest monsters in this universe. So I don't know that I could do that. Just
You
I think it
it's
would
a
get old really
business.
quick. Yeah.
Like, it's, a lot of people look at it and it's like, "Oh, it's like it is on the TV shows or the movies and stuff." Being a private investigator is it's a business. So, it is there, and the reason that you were doing it and, like, your guiding light is, "I need to pay the bills, and I want to make as much money as I can." And that's what you do as an investigator. Now, that has to be balanced with professional ethics, and I'm not just gonna do everything I can to make money.
Right.
But you don't always work for what you would consider the good guys in the case. You work for who pays you first. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of times that you're working for people that you don't like. Especially when you start out after you've been going for a few years. Like, I got to a point where I could pick and choose my clients. I could say no to those people. But when you start out those
Right.
first few years, when you're building your reputation up, you're working for big insurance companies or corporations that are hiring you, and you're
Mhm.
probably doing a discount for it. And they're wanting to screw someone out of the insurance settlement that they need, or they're wanting to get somebody out of a property and they're looking for dirt on them. You're trying to defend someone in a corporate death investigation who probably is at fault. Your job is to investigate and be as impartial as you can be, but they're going to be pretty pissed if you don't find something that gets them off the hook for it.
Right.
So there's a lot
Yeah,
of
see, I
that
don't
that
think
people
I
don't
could
think of.
do that. I could do that because I'm too. I mean, aside from I won't blame. Well, I mean, it's partially like being autistic. I'm very blunt and very. I tell people what's on my mind, and I'm
Mhm,
a very bad liar. And um, so even people I network with, people, if I were to, that's why I have a hard time being like a brand affiliate or doing anything like that when people ask me to do
mhm,
promos for stuff. Because if I don't know a lot about it or I don't feel that the company is not something that I also stand for, I have a like I have a personal, problem that really, really gets to me on things like that. So I don't think that I could do that long term. I would probably insult somebody or offend them in some way a
yeah, it
lot.
it takes a few years. Now, every once in a while, like, you catch some people doing some really bad stuff working for those companies, but more often than not, you're just out there trying to get them off the hook for something.
Even when I was doing a lot of personal training,
Mhm,
the type of clients that come to me know that I'm one of those people I'm not going to sugarcoat
mhm,
anything. Like, you're probably not going to like what I have to say, but it'll probably, to me, that's the only way I learn from other people is someone who's truthful with me and honest and tells me what I need to do to change. Like, I
mhm.
appreciate that, but not everybody does, and I get that. So
Yeah.
that's
Now, as a like, going through getting in shape and becoming a personal trainer, that was huge. Learning how to structure something as large as a novel and learning how to go through and write. My editors are, I don't wanna say jerks, but they're they're brutal, but that feedback's important, and there's this thing, and this is also for, like, ghost hunting. As a new investigator who's stepping out, who is, like, somebody's calling me and they're wanting advice, or somebody's wanting me to go through their investigation and point stuff out. So, judicially, I'm recognized as an expert in the investigative process. Not ghost hunting, the investigative process. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to look at how you ran that investigation. I'm going to look at your logic. I'm going to look at why you're saying what you're saying, what conclusions you're drawing, how you did the evidence, how you set up if you even had any controls when you were running experiments. And I'm going to point all of that out. And it's going to sound very, very cold and very brutal, but it is cold. This is an investigation. It's supposed to be an impartial thing, and people need to hear that feedback. I needed to hear that feedback when I started.
right.
It's not I would I would be being unkind if I didn't do that.
I think, yeah, absolutely. And I feel the same way as far as anything I do. If I go to that extent, that I'm doing it for the benefit of my client or whoever I'm working with, and um, oh, I was going to say, speaking of, have you considered ever working on just kind of like, I guess, kind of like Patricia Arquette, not as the DA, but because I've thought about this as well, just working with law enforcement. For a while I was doing like some missing persons cases and such, but just working with them for specific cases
I
that
have.
you happen to come across and things like that.
I haven't done things that I've happened to come across. So with law enforcement, with government agencies or municipalities, they contact me. So like I would go
Oh,
in. I
nice.
did a lot of fraud investigations, surveillance, and I would help with different things.
Mhm.
Especially if they had something that was like some sort of, I don't want to say corruption issue, but they had an issue with a city official and the police department could not be directly involved in the investigation. I would step in and take on that. Um,
Oh, that would
but
be.
I've done
Yeah.
that before. Yeah.
I think it got to a point with, and like you're saying, it's probably a combination of law of attraction and time slips, things like that, as far as things that happen in the future. Because it got to a point when I would dive into like a missing persons case, somebody who's still alive but been kidnapped or something like that. It got dangerous though because it's like I was one step ahead and I would be at the location right when like the the criminals showed up um to do whatever they're going to do. Like I would beat them there unknowingly. Like I would think that I was going to a location where something had already happened and I was actually meeting almost meeting them at the place that they were about to do something. So
Mhm.
that's kind of dangerous. So
There are
so
little things like that. We called it like this weird investigator's intuition where like we would lose somebody that we're following. And I'm like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just gonna go stand over here on this corner for a minute and see what happens. And the guy would walk past or drive
oh
past
yeah.
or something. We pick back up on him. With different cases too. And a lot of that's gonna depend on like the cop that you're dealing with or the city official you're dealing with. With missing person cases specifically, like we had this one city who if someone was close to retirement, they would be in the missing persons division because they were going after runaways. Even when we had one case that was obviously not a runaway, but they wanted to treat it that way until we got the district attorney's investigator involved in it. And then you've got people like who are higher level investigators who understand private sector that were fine with and actually wanted us brought in contract on stuff. So it's the personality of the cop on the case.
Now back to movies and novels and things like that and authors. I know we've discussed this before. And just this last year, actually, it's happened numerous times because I have quite a few friends who write, well, both nonfiction and fiction, but a lot of science fiction as well. Um, and somebody will call. I don't know how many times this happens. Something crazy, of course, will happen in my life. And I don't mean normal, like my normal everyday crazy, which is probably still crazier than most, but I mean like really crazy will happen in my life. And then, somebody out of the blue says, "Hey, Trish, listen to this story I'm putting together." And I'm like, "Stop." Because that just happened to me. So whatever storyline you're creating right now, that's like, I don't know if a dragon's going to attack me next or something, but can you write in something like positive because and it'll just happen to be the same exact off the wall thing that they'll be writing about. And I've talked about that numerous times with places I've investigated on my own, or been drawn to in the Topeka area because a lot of them coincide exactly with Stephen King's novels, which is terrifying. And so how much of you know us basically creating our reality, how much impact do you think that has on our lives?
Um, a lot. So there are actually studies going on right now about our reality and our perception of reality. There's a theory right now that we all actually have different realities that we're experiencing.
Mhm.
It's one of the things where people can see the same thing and they'll describe somebody with a totally different shirt. Or you'll
Yeah.
walk into, there's times like Kristen is convinced that the wall is like black, and I'm like, no, that's blue. And the way we experience, I mean, there's color blindness and stuff like that, but there are
I,
different things along the timeline that seem to hit different for different people. So it's possible that like our perception of and how we are interacting with, touching, seeing, smelling, hearing, is different from person to person.
I think it would have to be. I think
Mhm.
everyone's perception of everything is different. Even e- my perception of myself is different than yours of me, and vice
Mhm.
versa. And that's why I always that always confused me about even like religions and stuff. I'm like, aren't there technically millions of religions? Because everyone's is different. Everyone's perception of whatever you are, if you're Christian and the Bible is different, everyone's perception of, because it doesn't matter who you talk to, um, everyone has a different opinion about literally everything. Um, and then on the other hand, my mom, back to people living in different uh, dimensions on the same plane. My mom and I were talking about this the other day because growing up in New Mexico, or even, well, the Phoenix, um, most people are familiar with what happened in Phoenix years ago, where there were hundreds of thousands of people that witnessed UFOs over the city. But even some people, they could have been standing right next to someone who witnessed this, and that person didn't see anything.
Mhm.
So I'm like, maybe that's the case where, plus it has intuition, the ability to experience certain clairs that, uh, you know, clairaudience and clairsentience and things like that, even being clairvoyant, telepathic abilities, all of those things depends on the person. Back to the lifestyle thing, you can't experience any of those things if your mind is constantly cluttered, and technology and everything else does that these days. I personally, I don't watch TV that much. I'm in nature a lot. So I do things where my mind is quiet, and so I have the ability to allow those things in. Whereas in this day and age, most people can't, because
Mhm.
it's a noisy world, you know.
And that's why it's important to unplug. Like we went up to Gatlinburg. We try to go up a couple times a year and just get a cabin in the woods, and I'll go up and just sit outside and write vignettes because things slow down. You start to feel things. You start to experience time different, and
Yeah.
you get more detail out of the world around. And it's important to slow down. I've tried to stay off Facebook. Actually, I don't have personal accounts anymore on any social media platform. They're all creator accounts, or they have to do with a business or a product. Um, and that's all that I use it for, content creation and driving revenue. It's a job when on social media, when I'm on a screen.
Hmm.
I write on a computer, and I work on a computer, but I try not to watch too much TV. I try to get my entertainment from reading and sitting with words and with something that moves at a bit slower pace. I was at work earlier today, and someone walked in and they were talking about how the day was dragging, and I looked at the clock and it was 3 p.m., and the last time I looked at the clock it was 8 p.m. For me it was a split.
Yeah.
I know I ran sessions, but it moved so fast that it was gone, but they were dragging. And our entire life moves that way if we stay attached to screens and we keep trying to do these things, or keep trying to attach to technology instead of just experiencing life.
Hmm.
It goes so fast. My
Oh
son
yeah.
is 4 now. He was a baby 2 days ago. So if we don't unplug, like, our perception of reality changes too. Everything is fluid. Um, and it can go by so fast if you let it. I don't know where I was going with that, but that's where I'll stop there.
But I completely understand that, because I'm the same way. I'm one of those people who doesn't think there's enough hours in the day
Mhm.
to experience everything that I want to experience. And at this point in my life, I quite literally don't understand how anyone could ever be bored, ever. Like,
Mhm,
there's always something for me to do, and I don't have enough time,
mhm.
literally, to do all the things I want to do. So, and I
Oh,
don't
boredom.
just mean,
Our
I'm sorry.
children are never bored. They always have a
Mm,
screen. There's always something there. We're never bored. We took that away from ourselves. I talk to writers all the time about
yeah,
writer's block. There's no such thing as writer's block. You're not bored enough to create anything.
no,
There are times where like part of slowing down is being bored and sitting and not having anything to look at. Take that time where you would be sitting and just staring and scrolling aimlessly at your phone or scrolling
mhm,
aimlessly, excuse me, and just sit. Your mind will start to wonder and you'll start to create things.
yeah,
With writing, I'll sit down, I'll start a 10-minute timer and I'm in front of a screen. And if I don't want to write, if I sit there and look at the screen long enough, blank screen, blank page, I'm going to start trying to entertain myself and I'm going to start writing a story.
yeah.
And
That's how.
the, Mhm,
Well, I was gonna say I don't think, and people think that in order to get to that space they have to meditate or literally just sit still. No, being still does not mean quite literally just sitting, and staring at nothingness.
mhm,
There's a lot of different ways that you can. I was just talking to my niece about this the other day, that I have ADHD, so I can't sit still and do
mhm,
anything. But some of the greatest creations I've come up with have been when I'm either, I go on long, long walks every evening. I Even things that don't require me to think as much, like mowing the lawn. That's a form of meditation because I don't. I mean, sure, I have to, like, consciously, I have to make sure I'm not going to run over anything, but it's a pretty mindless job. You can kind of be on autopilot and do it. Um, or like, cleaning. That's another
mhm,
thing. I was telling her, I say I love to clean because I that's kind of a form of meditation. That's when I'm thinking of other things to create, or paint or write about or whatever.
mhm,
And so I think a lot of people think of being still and not doing it, it's just literally being on the treadmill or doing anything,
mhm.
even aerobics and stuff, is it's easy to allow your mind to wander. I mean, as long as you're in like a safe space.
Yeah, and that's where cool stuff with kids, like, they have tablets, they have video games, television, that they're not just outside playing. Again, having that second of boredom, I have to entertain myself. I'm gonna turn this stick into a sword or something and play some sort of game or make up a game.
Yeah.
Toys, like, kids have so many toys now, they don't have to imagine them
Yeah.
doing anything, they just pull out another figure that's in a different pose or has different stuff. It's I mean, it's cool that we have all this stuff, but
I
it's
think it's
sad
dangerous
that
too, though, and
well,
and
look at
sad. Yeah.
generative AI. We've got writers right now that are depending on a couple, not a lot, that are depending on AI to plot their novels for them so that they could just go and connect the dots and write it. Um, we haven't
See, but
taught
then you
ourselves to
take
be
away
creative.
the human energy of creation
Mhm,
because I've talked about that a lot with art since I'm an artist. When you take when you have a painting that takes someone 40, 50 hours to create, they're putting that time, that human energy into that painting, whereas AI can go and do it in, you know, 30 seconds.
mhm.
And it's really it is sad. It's sad because I think we're becoming codependent on all of these things. For even kids in school, they don't even know math anymore because they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm really good at math. Let me pull out my calculator."
Yep.
What? No. Or yeah, I'm a great writer. As far as in school, they don't know the what it was like going to a library and doing research, on old, like, looking have the librarian looking up the card file and indexes and having to actually write it out in your hand, getting
Oh, no,
crayons.
I know one kid, he's in college right now, ChatGPT's writing all his papers. Yeah,
It's sad. It's
yep.
it's it's really sad.
Like, I use it for copy. So like marketing copy,
Right.
stuff for work, sales
SEO,
copy,
like
what SEO.
keywords.
Yep. So I'll use it for that, and that's what it's for.
Right.
And it's a fantastic tool. But when it starts taking over the creative process and we start calling what it pushes out art, that's where we've really
Yeah.
failed as just a society. Getting too far into that, but there's a whole writer's strike going on right now, and that's got a big part to do with it.
Oh, I know. And the same with art too. Yeah.
Mhm,
Um, Now I did think of something the other day as far as AI, and people are probably going to be like, "Why didn't I think of that?" And they'll start taking notes on this. But um, in cold cases, I think that with the advancement of AI and with a lot of archives of newspapers and radio, TV, anything being archived on digitally now, I think that AI could be an excellent tool to be used in those things because
mhm,
you know back in the day in little small town newspapers and stuff, they wrote about everyone's lives. And so I think, in AI, and it takes people, well, if you're researching a case, it could take days, weeks, months, whatever,
mhm.
to have to go through every single one of those. Even now when I do genealogy and stuff, it takes me, I could spend an entire day on one person trying to go back through history and different, if it was somebody who traveled or, um, migrated from one place to the other, whatever. It takes a long time to go through those
Mhm.
records, whereas AI can do it very quickly. And I think that that might actually be a great tool in assisting with,
Oh, yeah, like,
because
companies are using it.
there's stories, especially with like homicide, serial killers, things like that, that might pop up that don't directly have to do with something that's already been documented in the legal system. Could be like the person's mom or something
Mhm,
says, "Oh, little Johnny came home for a visit this weekend," because newspapers used to put stuff like that. Anytime the family came home, anytime anything big happened, somebody had a birthday or whatever, they would write about it in the newspaper. And so I'm like, man, that's
yeah.
where I found a lot about like Jesse James and going through stuff that I'd never heard of. I was like, there's a lot in these, and they've only put those online in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I
So
was gonna say, like, a lot of those weren't online when I was doing research into houses for hauntings, or I'm doing, like, historical research for, like, a book or a story or article or something. Like, I had to, like, call the libraries. I'd, like, call the newspaper companies and be like,
oh yeah.
"Hi, can you send me
Yep.
whatever you've got from 1932," or whatever. Um, and it was a nightmare to go through. If all that stuff is put into something and you have an AI to go through it, it's done in 30 seconds. You have your timelines, you have your bullet points, you have it organized if you give it the right prompts. And that's what
Hmm.
it's for. It's an amazing tool for that. Doing research for novels has gotten a lot easier. It cuts down my planning time because instead of me having to go through and hit 90 billion websites and go down all of these rabbit holes to find them, I
Yeah.
can go to AI and be like, please find me a list of websites and articles to read about subject whatever. Um, and I can even put uh, a cross reference for an idea or a view on a topic versus something else, and it'll organize it for me that way so that I can just go through, read it, pull what I need, and start writing. Um, Great tool
Eh,
for that.
what's funny is I've always, for those that don't know, in the other worlds or underworlds or ether, um, that's the same theory and same concept as what guides do technically. People always ask mediums, how out of millions of people do you someone comes to you and you contact that one person when there's billions of dead people out there. Well, no, we don't directly initially we put the spark out there that that's who we're looking for, and it's almost like there's like there's like runners, and it goes through this network of things that like they go to a system and say, hey, we're searching for this person, and it puts that out there, and then eventually like, but it's the same concept. Like once you tap into that, it's easy to do. And then you could literally communicate with anyone who's ever lived, technically, if you wanted to.
Mhm.
Um, which is very odd to me that nobody ever does that. That's what made me interested in the historical aspects of it is, um, not researching things that trying to make things knock on doors and things like that. I'm like, I
Yep.
want to know how the universe works, and you know these people who no one ever got to talk to when they were living and things like that. I don't know, you glitched out there
Oh,
for
yeah,
a
I'm back.
sec. So last weekend,
Mhm.
so I asked Tanner earlier today if anything unusual happened to him over the weekend on would have been like Friday or Saturday night. Um and I would pull up the post, but I haven't she hasn't gotten back to me as far as her. I won't mention the group or person or anything,
Mhm.
but it was in your area. And this is one of those cases, like, did everyone, was it a time slip? What happened? So I'm gonna ask your opinion of it. Um and she did not public, as far as like people didn't go to the news about this. It was in one neighborhood. So it wasn't for recognition, it wasn't for, there's no um like other motive behind this. It was just asking opinions of what happened. But in one neighborhood, it was around 1 o'clock a.m. and this lady experienced some knocking on her door, not only the front door but also the back door. So, and she said it was about 10 knocks, and it wasn't just a normal knock. She said that it was a knock like the police knocking on the door. That was her her exact quote. Um, and at that same time, neighborhood dogs started barking and going crazy. And so she got up, went outside. At the same time, four of her neighbors also opened their front door and were looking around. After the men in the neighborhood, searched the perimeters, didn't find anyone, they all had um, security cameras, ring cameras, things like that. Nobody caught anything on those. And within a few minutes of being outside, they all saw a giant flash, like a lightning bolt, go across the sky. There was no thunder, no sound to it whatsoever, complete silence. Um, every one of those neighbors experienced the same knocking at the same exact time.
That's
So
cool.
what's your take on
Intergalactic Ding Dong Dash.
it? So so you all will have to go because I've only seen one or two episodes. Again, I don't watch anything, but always a movie or something comes across my radar um when things like this happen. And the funny thing was that I had just that day followed up with Tanner about the show tonight, and it was literally right after that I read about this. And I'm like, there it is. That's the synchron. Like, there it is. Um, so I believe it's called Paper Girls
Mhm.
on Netflix. I think it's on Netflix. Might be on Amazon. Pretty sure it's on Netflix. Um, watch you could probably find just in the preview of that. That's exactly what happens in these time slips that happen.
Mhm.
Um, that this entire, I guess, world community experiences. And every time they see this like lightning bolt coming, every time there's going to be like a time slip. And so I was like, huh, that happened right in your neck of the woods. Like,
I'm gonna have to see that. That's neat. Yeah.
so
Um, and it's probably proof that like aliens have teenagers too.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's another show about that. Ironically, about a babysitter that only babysits for aliens.
Nice.
So that was two things. But as far as creating your reality, do you have things like that happen in your own life every day as well?
Not really. My life is pretty normal now. Basically, I go to work and I work on books, create content. Even with Ghost Hunter Advice, I don't have a regular release schedule, so I'm not always looking into stuff. I'm not always going down those rabbit holes anymore. It's just when I do find something or I get called into something that I think is going to make a great piece of content, I'll put out a new episode. Like the old episodes are coming out now, but the new ones just come out whenever something happens. So no,
Huh.
I'm pretty much I work all the time. Either at my I'm over corporate wellness for a company. So I do that regular 9 to 5 job, and then I basically get up super early and write, or excuse, I get up super early and edit, and then I write on lunch, and I write in the evenings, and I just super focused on getting this writing career going. So not a lot of room to go look into the weird these days.
You should write first because they say that your brain is the most, most active, most creative, most intelligence you have. Because if you think of the day as like a gradual decrease in mental capacity and things like that, just because of the ebb and flow of your body resting. It's at what, like 4 in the morning,
Mm,
4:30. You have the most. I used to meet clients at the gym and go work out and stuff at like 5:30,
mhm,
but then I started journaling at around that time. And interestingly enough, it was during times where I had a block in creativity, and half the things I was like, "Oh, this is stupid. I'm not, it's not going to work. I'm not going to do this," or consistently. That was the time that I wouldn't even remember half of what I wrote at 4:30 in the morning, which most people wouldn't. Like,
mhm.
even with dreams, most people forget them within 5 minutes of waking up. So that was an excellent time I found. Even if I looked back weeks later, I'm like, wow, that was actually intelligent. Like, that sounded really.
See, that's why I edit in the mornings though. So like I do first draft like throughout the day. Like 11 to 3 is like my best time to get first draft
Hmm.
in. And then when I'm editing, I just go through and I clean it up and I tighten the prose and I make the writing better. And so I have an easier time doing that. And if I do that in the evening, like I've tried doing it in the evening and using the programs to help me with it, that's fine. But actually writing new prose on top of that, it sucks. So I do
Wow.
that first thing.
I don't think, well, editing's something that you enjoy though. So
Mhm.
that you're probably more productive at that, getting more done in a shorter amount of time, I would think, during that
Yeah.
time. I think when I say things happen in my life that are unbelievable that people don't, I think they happen to everybody, but I
Mhm.
think people just don't pay attention. I was explaining that to I took a walk with my mom and my daughter the other day, and we're walking by this house. And now it's summer in the northern hemisphere, and so everything's green and things have bloomed, and there's this one house, only one, and it had two trees in its yard that were completely, there were no leaves on the tree.
Hmm.
um the trees weren't dead, but they just didn't grow any leaves. There was nothing on the branches. There was the people only, there were weeds in the yard, but that was it. And I said to them, my mom and my daughter just walked by it like another house. I said, no, this house, you can tell a lot about people by the houses they live in, and yards and things like that. I said, these people aren't fond of plants. And My daughter said, well, how do you know? I said, well, one, their entire yard, I mean, entire yard, front, back, everything was completely concrete. And then that energy spread to the trees, obviously. The trees were like right on the property line. They still didn't grow any leaves, even though they were still alive. They could feel that energy too, I'm sure.
Hmm.
Now, whatever reason the people have for not, maybe they have allergies, maybe they, whatever, they just didn't want plants. So they had a few leaves or a few weeds growing in the cracks of the concrete, but it's all concrete. I'm like, most people wouldn't notice that.
Mhm.
Most people wouldn't. And then we keep going. We come upon, which I absolutely love. There's little boxes. I don't know if they have these where you live. Um, it's the little book exchange, I believe.
Mhm.
And it says take a book, leave a book, which we've got to go back and leave some. But we come upon this box, almost missed it because there were some trees growing over that one. But I stopped and I'm like, and I went back to it. And the first book sticking right out was one with my daughter's name right on the front. I'm like, so the way our universe works is so perfectly constructed that the person who placed that book there prior to us coming along, obviously, who knows when that was for that matter, or the ones in that series, it was a lot of the books there specifically had something to do with our day,
Mhm.
you know, and most people would be like, well, that's just coincidence, that's whatever. Okay, but that happens hundreds of times a day for me. Billboards, sign, whatever. And that's what I mean by and it absolutely happens for everybody. It's just we don't pay attention, because we're disconnected from that part of the universe, I think,
Mhm.
to an extent.
It's one of those. I mean, like people see what they're looking for. If you're looking for problems, you see problems. If you're looking for synchronicities, you'll find them. If you go into any location looking for a ghost and you want to find a ghost, you'll find one or you'll make one. And if you want opportunities and you're looking for opportunities, they'll present themselves. It's one of those things with like when it comes to paying attention, it's what are you paying attention to?
Which you feeds you.
Mhm.
So your future, you said your novel is due to be released in the winter.
Mhm.
And tell the name of it again.
It's Fools and Corpses.
Fools and Corpses. And what inspired that specific?
Um, I was sitting down. Uh, I was looking for something that still had a bit of spookiness to it, but was more commercially viable than horror, which is what I had been writing. After talking to some editors and speaking to some people in the industry, they think that I had a shot at doing this as a real career. So I wanted to move into a genre that I enjoyed writing, but that sold well. Um, and I was like, you know what? I'll write a mystery. I've wanted to write a mystery forever. And I started thinking about the ghost hunting tour place here in Chattanooga. I started thinking about some of the things that we had done in Gatlinburg, and then the characters just came. I started thinking about the setting and what would happen and who would be there. And with a lot of my stories, it's just someone walks into my head and they're like, "Hey, all right, I'm here." And they just start doing things. And I sat down, and I'm a plotter, so I took them and started looking at the situation, and I started interviewing the characters and writing out these sheets about their backgrounds and where they were from and who they were. And then as I went through the story, I just started. I I knew that in book one of the series, somebody that they knew had to die because that had to be what was the catalyst to get them involved in the investigation to begin with. There had to be stakes there, and then I just went through and I put all the little plot points and stuff together in the story, and then like the real magic happened when I sit down to actually write it because I had the characters, I had what was going to happen in their lives. And I had an idea of how they would react to it, and however they reacted to it would move the book along. And there were some changes because they did some things that I wasn't expecting. Um, but yeah, it was a fun process, and I was looking for something to write, and they popped up.
Wow. I don't think I haven't gotten to that place of where fictional stories just come to me like that. But um, do you plan in the future on teaching more
Mhm.
about your process or the process in general of writing things like that again?
I do. So with Writing Fright is spinning into another podcast called Killer Prose, getting more into mystery, thriller, and I might keep the two separate and have those run as two different shows, interviewing different authors. But after, I'm hoping that I'll have 3 books out by the end of 2024. The other two are already planned. I want to make sure this one's good to go, and nothing massive about the town is going to change when my editor gets a hold of it. Um, and after 3 books and about
Nothing, nothing
10,000
massive.
because they can always like throw stuff in there.
Yeah.
Um, so after 3 books and about 10,000 copies sold, so that I have that social proof, I plan on doing some writing classes online.
I think and we've talked about that before, and you have such an amazing way of explaining things, I think, about anything, any subject,
Thank you.
that puts it into um it's easy to understand, and I know for myself that's saying a lot because um with the way I learn things anyways personally, um I'm the opposite. Like, I don't easily understand certain concepts right away of a lot of things, or I might understand a more complex, um, and vice versa. So I think you do have that that gift of being able to teach people in that aspect.
Oh, thank you.
Um, but I do also like the concept of Scooby Doo. So if that
Yes.
you ever want, I've got like 2 cats and a Swiss Mountain Dog. We might be.
We could put them
But
together into like one like Great Dane costume with like
yeah.
each of the cats working a leg, and like maybe the dog has 2 of them.
So, funny thing, which would make an interesting it'd make a good reality show or something, I swear. All of my vehicles also communicate with me. I mean, openly too. Like, now other people are seeing it, but as with any electronics, um, and for instance, and my dad, he would probably hate it if he knew I was telling this story real quick. Um, but I was at their house recently, and he was coming in for the night, and he comes in, he has this look on his face. He's like, "Did you just mess with your car? Something? Do you have your keys?" Or I'm like, "No, they're over in my purse. I haven't." No. He said, "I swear, your car just like lit up, and it was dark." He said the lights came on, and it sounded literally like a tired horse at the end of the day. Like, and I was like, "What?" He said, and it kind of beeped and something, and it was right when I was walking by it, and I'm like, "No, no, haven't touched it." And my mom starts laughing because she knows this. She's experienced this, and not just that vehicle, any vehicle I've ever had. And but we've never told him that because he would never believe me. But he's like, "Huh, it's just odd." So he goes back. I said, "Well, maybe he was trying to tell you something. Maybe he was trying to warn you about something." He goes back outside, and he had left like um I don't even know what it was, this antique on the back of his truck, like outside. So either A, it could have gotten damaged by the weather or whatever, this rainy season, tornado season, all kinds of stuff, or animals, or somebody could have stolen it. And I'm like, "See, I was trying to tell you something." And he's like, No, no, that's probably just a coincidence. I'm like, okay, it tells me stuff all the time, so
Yeah, and as weird as it sounds, like cars, I we spend a lot of time in them. We put a lot of focus and
Mhm.
energy in them, and people we love our transportation. It goes back to horses. We loved our horses. Um,
Yeah,
and I think we imbue them with a little bit of energy. It's there's been times that my car has swerved for no reason. I didn't act on the steering wheel. There was no way that I could react, and I missed hitting something.
yeah,
Or the car is having trouble, and it's like just 2 more miles, and it'll start to die, and I'm like, please just go 2 more miles, and it'll hit it. I had
yeah.
my transmission went down and did that with my transmission. I was like, "You just gotta get us to the shoulder, and we'll be fine." And it sputtered just enough. I had this one little bit of get up left and got over to the shoulder, and then spent 3 months in the shop getting a transmission put in.
Oh, the last part of what you said, it might have been my end though, that cut
Oh,
out.
I gotcha. I was just saying, like, we got over to the shoulder and then spent, like, 3 months in the shop getting a new transmission.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's the last car that I had to do surveillance in, so I did surveillance for about 2 years in that car, and it's a lot of time doing super sneaky stuff in there.
I recently sold my truck, and I was actually really pretty my daughter was too. Like, I was sad about it. And I know it's a material thing, but like I said, that thing, it just like yours has probably saved my life a few times.
Mhm,
It even and this goes back to maybe, there's Bluetooth and like everybody has on different models, like the GMC and Chevy and all that has what OnStar, whatever,
mhm,
and then anyways, there was someone following me one time, and I noticed it home from the gym, which happens to women a lot, especially at night.
mhm,
And my truck dialed 911. Like the dispatcher comes on over my intercom out of nowhere, and I'm like, but it made me. I turned off to talk like into a McDonald's parking lot or something to talk to her because she was asking for my location. I was like, I apologize, ma'am. I'm not I didn't call, but the car went on, and because I stayed there for a bit, they probably, you know, knew my location and everything. I mean, as far as the dispatcher, but it was interesting that it was like 911, and I'm like, I don't have I didn't call, but this person had been following me for a while, so it was super it was incredible at the timing, I guess, so I was in danger, and something, whether it was my vehicle or something else put out that call emergency, was
mhm.
was right at the time that I probably would have been like, who knows what happened if I would have gotten home. I was only a few blocks from my house at the time. So if I had made it that far, maybe I would have been injured or something. So I think things happen.
Yeah,
I'm
that
really
one's
protected
definitely,
for
that's what you want a car to do.
some.
Like, get me to where I'm going, make sure I don't get kidnapped, call the cops if something happens.
I always think about that now too. This is from too many scary stories when I was little and like R.L. Stein books and stuff.
Mhm,
But now that they put the new notification on your dash, look in the back seat before, but it's referring to car seats and children, But I don't think of it that way. I'm like, damn it. Like I'm looking in the back seat to make sure there's not a killer behind my seat, that's like hiding hiding out or something.
we
That was
had, this is one of those weird things that we all experience. We recently, put our dog down, and she was in really poor health, and
no.
she had arthritis, couldn't move, so she would yip at night when she had to go out, and she was not a small dog, she was a husky mix, and so she would be like, "Yip, yip," until somebody got up, and, we were all laid in bed, and, like, I wake up because I thought I heard the yip, and I'm kinda, like, half asleep, and I'm like, "Oh, I'm just dreaming." Can I go back? And then like Kristen taps me and she's like, "Did you hear that?" And then like Finn's awake and we all heard it at the same time. There are no other dogs around here.
Wow.
It's weird the energy and the things that will stay around.
Stay around, yeah.
Mhm.
I know where I live now, my my niece had a cat that passed away about a year ago, but my cat, I noticed playing with it a lot at night,
Mhm.
like late at night. I mean, my daughter was like, "It looks like she's playing with something like another." I'm like, "She is. She's like she's playing with Oliver, the old cat." It stays around there. Oh, which is interesting, that reading box,
Mhm.
where that was located was not even half a block from where um the lady she bought her house from passed away. I didn't know that
Oh,
actually
wow.
until today. But one of the books had my daughter's name on it. There was another book that was called, it was something very specific. It was like Messages from Angels. So really cool, the synchronicity in that one,
Mhm.
you know. Um, Especially since I didn't know that the lady passed away. Very, very nicely. No bad vibes whatsoever. Lived in the same house for like 60 years. Um, but I didn't know that. So that was interesting that all, and we had just passed a memorial garden I didn't even know existed that day, right in the same area. So it's interesting how
That's interesting.
our worlds communicate. But Tanner, we are getting close. It's already been, I can't believe it's been 2 hours, but um, as always, it has been a pleasure. Tell everyone where they can find you. I guess I
Yeah.
have it now that I put this new banner up.
Yeah, no, I love the new banner. It's awesome. So like on Facebook, you can find me if you're looking for ghost hunter advice. You can find me at Ghost Hunter Advice on Facebook and Instagram. Trying to think if I'm anywhere else. I don't think I have a Discord or anything up for Ghost Hunter Advice. You can also, if you want to check out the show, listen to the podcast. It is audio only, and you can find it on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and I believe I'm still on Sirius FX. Um, and connect with me on Facebook again at at Ghost Hunter Advice. If you are interested in writing and stuff, you want to check that out. The podcast for writing is called Writing Fright. It is everywhere that I just mentioned and a few other places. And then my website, writingfright.com. If you want to check out some of my books as they come out, you can connect with me on Facebook at Tanner Rutledge Author.
And I'm going to be starting a book club on my Lenora Lore site. And for those of you that don't, everybody's like, "Ooh, what a cliche name!" No, Lenora. That's my middle name. So I actually,
It's
and it
legit.
was both grandmothers. Yes. Um, so that's where that came from. But I'm gonna start book club on that of all these amazing authors that I know that have either books coming out or have written books in the past. So I'm
Nice.
excited about that. That way people can one of the biggest things that readers can do for authors, I've done it a lot, is leave reviews.
Yes.
The same as it's different coming from your editor, opposed to actual people who read it. So I do that a lot. I like doing that. I like giving feedback and how it affected um, or synchronized with my own life. I think that's really cool. So,
That's fantastic, and we love hearing that, and not only is that, like, a big boost for us, or, like, if there's stuff you didn't like and you talk
mhm.
about it, it lets us know what to fix in the future, but, there are certain marketing avenues and certain markets and stores that we cannot get into until we have a certain amount of reviews on the books. So that actually does open money and opens doors for us to make more revenue in different bookstores and through different marketing platforms by having those reviews.
And I used to, I still try to. I used to be a part of book clubs that actually, I know this sounds ancient and probably ages me. book clubs that actually meet up in person with each
Yep.
other. Crazy thing, crazy concept. I know you kids out there are like, what? You met people in person and talked about books? What is this craziness? Yes. Um, but yeah, I think it's amazing, especially since I've been traveling a lot to be able to do that, on an online platform as well. So we're excited to see the how your next project unfolds, your
Oh,
novels. So,
thank you.
and thank you again for being on my show tonight. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Um,
Likewise.
Thank you again to Carnation. See, I mentioned it twice this time. Twice. Twice. For sponsoring my show and, of course, the network. And everyone, next week, if you celebrate Independence Day, I believe that is. So since I changed my show to Tuesday last year, I had a show on the 4th of July, not even a pre-recorded one. I was probably the only one, and it sounded like a war zone in my neighborhood. I mean, although that wasn't different from any other night, um but this year it'll now that I switched to Tuesdays, it'll be on the 4th of July again. So, if you celebrate that, happy Independence Day. And I will probably do a pre-recorded show so I can actually spend the 4th with my children this year. Um, Everyone have a safe week. Keep your pets inside for that day. I always worry about them. And we will be back the following week. So, um, and you too, Tanner, have happy 4th of July.
Oh,
So,
you too.
thank you. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you for listening. And we will see you next time.